Hello and welcome to Deja View, the Ithacans Weekly Review podcast. If you're watching this on the video, as you should be, you're probably very confused right now, as you well should be, because I'm here with Kara Bowen talking about Suspiria, a very confusing movie, kind of, maybe, question mark a little bit. We're going to dive right into this, because there's a lot to talk about and a lot to unpack, which is something I say a lot when I'm stalling for time for no good reason. Suspiria, 1977, a movie by Dario Argento. Very strange, very colorful, has some great music, like you just heard now, hopefully, unless we got taken down for copyright reasons, which has happened before. Fun fact. This one is a little bit different, a lot different. Can you tell us how?
Yeah, so the original 1977 Suspiria movie, it was like an hour and 36 minutes. The plot was pretty threadbare, but its main emphasis was on its lighting and sound design and everything. This one, the 2018 Suspiria, was directed by the Call Me By Your Name guy, Luca Guadagnino, starred by the 50 Shades of Grey girl, Dakota Johnson, and Tilda Swinton as, like, 3 characters. So it takes the same premise of the original Suspiria movie of Susie, an American who travels to Germany to dance in a highly respected ballet company. In the new one, it is a contemporary dance company, and there are witches and magic afoot, and people get murdered and things go crazy.
Yes, get murdered in very horrifying, brutal ways. I was genuinely unsure whether or not I would be able to sleep last night after I saw this movie. I am not rattled. I do not get rattled by horror movies. You can listen to tons of shows where I say this isn't scary, this is bad, and the people who made it should feel bad. That's never true. You shouldn't. Everybody's doing a great job, and I love movies. But this really upset me. And it's a simple idea, and it's an idea that's been done before, where Susie is more or less being groomed by these witches that she's fallen in with unknowingly to participate in an ambiguous ritual, to do an ambiguous thing. And as the movie goes on, we find out that she's being groomed to feed one of the mother witches, of which there are 2, and there's a power divide in this coven.
Yeah, so the general premise of Suspiria is that there are 3 mothers. I don't know their Latin names, but it's Mother of Darkness, Mother of Tears, Mother of Sighs, and Suspiria is Mother of Sighs. So there are these 3 mothers, and then the teachers or the head of the company are witches who want to channel the mothers or in some way, and they're trying to have their young dancers be part of the ritual too.
Yes, and
that.
Unknowingly too, kind of. And in this version, there are 2 leaders, and there's a power schism, which is also mirrored by a broad setting metaphor where it's set in Berlin when Germany was split.
Yes.
So you have the power struggle there, and then you have the power struggle in this coven where Tilda Swinton is going up against, also Tilda Swinton, Madame Blanc.
Madame Blanc and Madame Marcos.
And Madame Marcos. Madame Marcos you don't see at all until the end, and she's just this rotting pile of flesh, and she's the one who's in charge.
She's Jabba the Hutt.
She really is. I've made a lot of Jabba the Hutt references recently. I'm going to do a little tangent here. We should be talking about this movie, but I want to say this. For whatever reason, when I like somebody a lot as like a person, my go-to thing to say is that I want them to be Jabba the Hutt, and I want me to be Salacious Crumb, who's that little cackling goblin thing that sits next to Jabba the Hutt. And this is just a recurring metaphor I use in my daily life. You're allowed to look disappointed. I don't know. I know. Everybody.
Moving on from whatever that was.
Everybody tells me that. I'm sorry. I needed to get that out in the open. Anyway, Suspiria, a movie about mutilating people.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point of like, what this reimagining, because it has really, it only takes the basic premise of the original and it completely changes it, adds on an entire hour of runtime. It takes the power struggle between the mothers and the witches and their students, and places it inside Berlin in like the German autumn, with like there's a lot of political conflicts and terrorism, and it really examines the dynamic of power between all of them, and there's a lot of layers with that, which I appreciate, but it's also kind of banging you over the head with, we have subtext.
It's a lot. I think in expanding this movie out so much, any subtlety has been completely demolished and crushed. There's not really much of a mystery going on, where the first one is a horror mystery. You don't know what's happening. The word witch isn't said until like an hour and 10 minutes into that hour and 30-minute movie. And here, like, first scene, you know there are witches, you know that they are grooming her for this thing, you know that there is a power struggle going on, you know you're in a divided country. Like, all of this is laid bare immediately. The few things that aren't laid bare aren't really mysteries and are more twists. So the final scene of this movie is Dakota Johnson actually being a witch god and murdering a bunch of fools.
The female part is important.
Yes. Sorry. A witch goddess who goes around and murders a bunch of fools to a really poor music choice.
Yeah, okay.
It's like this soft, not folk song, but like this soft alternative cover as the embodiment of death goes around and pops some heads, quite literally.
So what characterized, and we'll get into this later, but what characterized the original was the fantastic score by Goblin. And in the new one, they had Tom York, the Radiohead guy, do all of the music. And I'm not a fan of Radiohead, but I wasn't, shocked by anything that he had put in the movie until this very violent scene with, do you remember the name of the song? What was the name of the song?
I can't remember the name of the song off the top of my head, but something very soft, something very gentle, something that should not be juxtaposed with this thing, because it's funny, and it shouldn't be, and the way it's shot is funny, and everything about that moment is not in keeping with the rest of the movie, where a lot of violence will happen, but it makes you sit with it, and it's very quiet and subdued. And then here it's this Halloween costume walking around and having its musical moment and like murdering a bunch of people, which I wasn't particularly a fan of. Because if you go all the way back, when Dakota Johnson is just coming into this school and she's just dancing. Like, right off the gate, she's just dancing and doing an audition. And there's so much power in her movement before anything is associated with it. Just the way she's like pushing against the air and pushing against the ground, and the way the sound feels very tangible when it happens is grotesque. And then it pays off in the best and worst possible way.
Yeah, I could talk for hours just about the dancing. I think changing from the original's ballet to contemporary dance, has such physicality to it watching it. In her audition scene, there's no music. You just hear her like pants and squeaks of the floor as she's doing this amazing, really harsh dance. And then later, in an amazing scene where one of the other students that's fallen out of favor with the teachers, somehow her Susie's movements have binded with her, and for all the dance movements that Susie does, the student in a downstairs practice room, her body contorts and her bones snap, and it's horrific to watch. It is. So
it's like the Force if the Force was horrifying. Like, it's this weird telekinetic relationship, and it keeps flipping back between Dakota Johnson doing some real like energetic pushes and stomps on the ground, and this poor woman slamming into walls and violently breaking. And if you watch the trailer for this movie, there's a really quick image of a woman's face pressing against a mirror and distorting, and it's a 5-minute scene of that. It is one of the most upsetting moments in a movie I've ever watched.
When you think it's gotta end now, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And then they go back to it again later when all of the witches find her, come at her with these long like needle hooks, and I mean long, like 2 feet long, stab her, and at this point she is just a mass of flesh on the ground, contorted, still there, still alive, and still moaning, and they hook into her and pick her up. And even then it's not over, because she's still there later on in the movie too.
Yeah, it's gory in small moments where the whole movie as a whole isn't dominated by like these terrible murder scenes. It's not like a blood fest. But in the moments where there is violence, it's so impactful and properly terrifying, like gross.
Yeah. And that mounts as time goes on. You have that scene that we just talked about in the first act, or it's probably not because this movie has explicit acts that it sets up. 6 acts, or what is it, 6 acts and an epilogue. The epilogue is called A Sliced Pear, which I find hilarious. And I know why, because there's a sliced pear in the scene, but you could have given it any other name. Yeah, but there is a wide gulf between these horrifying moments. And you get to the end, and then it picks up again, where they're doing another dance performance. One of the dancers knows something is up and is going to investigate it, and goes down into the basement of this dance studio and finds a collection of horrors unlike anything I could have imagined. One of which being a decayed Chloe Grace Moretz, who appears earlier in the movie as like the catalyst for everything. Then this weird homunculus of flesh that doesn't have hands, that's just praying mantising around. And then she walks down a hallway where these weird black holes in the floor form, and her foot gets caught in it, and there's a compound fracture, and this movie goes for the bones.
All of this happening while it really viciously cuts to the dance company as a whole performing in these like they're bound with red ropes, and they're doing this amazing choreography. It just, I love it. Okay, this movie's polarizing. Do you like it?
That's a really complicated question, Kara. Because on one level, it did something that most horror movies can't, which is freak me out. Mm-hmm. And every time I say that, I have to qualify it with, I'm not a brave man. I am a coward if there ever was one. You try to scare me, I will embarrass myself and run away. But horror movies don't do that, and this did because of how grotesque and unrelenting it was, which also means I will never be able to watch this again. And it is also flawed. It's far too long. Mm-hmm. There is a character in this movie who could have been completely excised from it. And
are you talking about the therapist?
Yes. There's an old man in this movie who is, he's not the protagonist, but he's kind of meant to be the hero. He's investigating what's going on here. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't actually do anything. And the movie ends with Dakota Johnson as a witch god wiping his memory to, like, telling him what happened in his past. There's a mystery in his past he's been trying to solve, telling him that, and then wiping his memory as an act of pity, which, first of all, we've all watched horror movies. We know that's actually a bad thing. And second of all, more or less makes his entire role in this movie pointless. Mm-hmm.
So his role, I feel, is just to really hammer home the thematic elements of like guilt and power struggle, and like it's set in Germany post World War II of the whole generation of like, how do we move on from this? How does the power structure function with that? But his inclusion isn't necessary. We can already guess at the thematic elements without him wandering around trying to figure out stuff. He doesn't contribute much.
No, and he becomes kind of like an audience identifier. Even though Dakota Johnson is theoretically the main character, she doesn't have a personality, which really bothered me until I realized that that's intentional, mm-hmm. and it's because she's being born at the end of the movie, and that's why. So all of the pathos goes into him. Mm-hmm. But you then have this like, there's a word for this, and I can't, vestigial limb mm-hmm. that is hanging off the edge of this movie and doesn't contribute enough, like you said. Even though I think his storyline is interesting, it's just not right for this movie. Mm-hmm. Like, him searching for his wife and thinking that, or knowing that he failed her and that he's the reason she's gone is really upsetting. And it brings the Holocaust into it in a way that I personally wasn't prepared for and really wasn't able to handle well. Mm-hmm. Because it's so resonant and upsetting. But just because that made me feel an emotion doesn't mean it needs to be attached to the rest of this.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm willing to forgive a horror movie with bad characters if the horror is good enough. Mm-hmm. And
I loved this movie. And this is going to be my, like, Kara loves Luca Guadagnino spiel, because I love everything he's ever directed. He is such, like, a really visceral, like, it's sensory overload in the best way. Even though the aesthetics of the film are so gray and dreary and dry, it still feels so tangible. And he has such, like, he has such an erotic way of directing that every scene is charged in some way. It's long, but at no point was I like, all right, I can leave now, because personally for me, I felt like every minute was like very full of life.
I agree with that. I mean, even the parts of it that I feel like are unnecessary were still well handled. I just wish it had been a little tighter, because those moments that are charged are so powerful and so overwhelming. Like, this was an exhausting movie because it doesn't let up, and because of the way he infuses like that sexuality and that anger and that power into every act, even the non-dance moments, you know, when she's dreaming, and it's this clip show of nightmares. Like, that has so much energy in it, and that's a very common idea. You know, that's something that comes up a lot, but still works. Yeah.
I just have a lot of feelings. There's a lot to unpack here.
There's
a lot.
This is a movie that our half-an-hour format fails, because you could do a 4-hour podcast on this and never scratch the surface. Like, you could cover it in that time, but it's tough. And as I say that, we do have to move on, but we get to move on to Tilda Swinton, that wonderful alien who has graced our planet with her presence. What a delight.
Too funky.
Okay, so now it's time to talk about everybody's friend, Tilda Swinton, who is in this movie as 3 characters, which I didn't realize at the outset. I knew she was Madame Blanc, and she just looks like herself, you know, Tilda Swinton. I guess it's kind of unfair to say she looks like herself. She also plays Madame Marcos, who appears at the end and is this fleshy, you know, skin suit. And then she plays the doctor we referred to earlier, Joseph. But she doesn't just play the doctor. She plays Lutz Eberforth, who is the actor who is the doctor, because this movie needed something else weird to happen for it to go forth.
Potentially unpopular opinion. I don't like her as the doctor. I don't see any reason for her to be the doctor.
That character to me feels unnecessary, like we talked about, but that casting is bonkers. Like, I don't understand. Even the argument that can be made where it's supposed to be juxtaposition between the witches and this other force, and you want to have those played by the same person to create a contrast,
but here's the thing. You can do that, that's fine, but in universe, there's absolutely no acknowledgement that Tilda is playing both of these characters. So it seems like so within the movie, it doesn't have any like metaphorical implications.
No.
And outside of it, it seems like a whole lot of effort to go through for some like Easter egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Because a lot of the discourse around this movie when it was first happening was, who's this old actor who we've never heard of before? And then everybody said, it's Tilda Swinton. And they went, no, it's not Tilda Swinton. And then the movie comes out and they go, yeah, I mean, you were right.
With absolutely no acknowledgement of it.
No. There's
no point. And I know Glenn is obsessed with Tilda Swinton. She's been in like a bigger splash other movie, but like, we don't need that.
We don't. And it's another one of these moments in this movie that feels like they were pushing things a little bit further than they needed to.
See, here's the thing. I don't see why it's necessary in a movie, specifically about like motherhood and the power dynamics between women, with a female-dominated cast. Why do they have to insert this male character, whether or not he's played by a woman, as like the main emotion, like the person we're supposed to identify with? I don't see why that's necessary.
No, it's a very strange character choice and casting choice.
Me.
It did too, because even in the original, if you look at the original, there are male characters in there, but like they don't do anything.
Yeah, there's like 3 of them.
Yeah.
And they're useless.
And one of them gets murdered
by
his dog. And in this one, he's such a major force.
Mm-hmm.
And he's so static in terms of what's actually being done. And it is frustrating, because this really is, this is a movie that has a large female cast, but you're right, it is about women too.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason for this old dude to show up here.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, he is, you know, and again, he's also treated with a lot of importance too, which is strange. We didn't really acknowledge this before, but partway through the movie, the witches say, you know what would be a good idea? if we brought this guy in on it.
We need a witness for a ritual.
Yes.
Because all of our girls would go insane, but we need this old dude.
Yes. And, I mean, that's an interesting premise, but even so, it doesn't justify. And the other side of this that I think also falls down is the original one was a mystery. And we'll talk about that in a minute, too. This one isn't. And he's playing the private investigator role. You know, he is the sane man in the insane world, and I think that's what I said before. But he's not solving anything. And the things that he are solving are the things that the audience already knows, so it's not exciting when he discovers it. Because for the most part, he also doesn't.
Yeah. Like, as a viewer watching it, I was like, oh, I don't want to know all the reasons behind it. I just want to sit back and be like, let's see where it's going to take me. So I don't need this, self-insert character to be, doing the investigating for me.
No, especially in something that's so transparent, you know, which we also talked about. Like, there isn't enough of a mystery here to justify this. You know, he's in that first scene with Patricia, with Chloe Moretz, and she tells him what the movie is about and what's happening and what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, there's no discovery. There's nothing that really preserves the integrity of that mystery, which is unfortunate because this movie is rooted in mystery because the original was rooted in mystery, and that's where we're going to head now. Okay, so we talked about this. This is a remake, reimagining, but it's worth talking about how it compares to the original so we get a better picture of what's different. And I'm coming to this recently. I watched the original immediately before we sat down to talk about this, but you're more familiar with it.
Yeah. I'm not a Suspiria expert, but the original was, we had already touched on this before, but the reason the original is kind of a cult movie is not particularly because the plot is so intense. It's just watching it is so visually stunning because it relies so heavily on extremely strong Technicolor primary color lighting, especially red is somehow in every scene. No source of it. It's just everything is awash in red. And again, with a really famous score. It's such an incredible aesthetic experience. And what's interesting about the original is that all of the bright color, the noticeable soundtrack is completely stripped from it. For all the color that's in the original, the new one's based off of neutrals.
Yes, and I knew the original by reputation. You know, I'd seen stills. I don't think I'd ever heard the music, which is baffling because I love it. But I was very worried about that because you see the stills for this movie, and it's set in Berlin, and Berlin in 1977 was not a happy, colorful place, and this movie treats it that way.
Yeah.
You know, even the dance studio, which was this big, lavish, mansion-like place in the first, is this sad brick building in this one. You know, but it still works, and it plays up a different kind of dread. Something I think a little bit more subtle than the original one, which is kind of like a haunted house. Oh no, the maggots are falling from the ceiling, you know?
Oh no!
Oh no, there's barbed wire outside of this window. I was kind of disappointed watching the original one because it had been held up in legend for me for so long, and it was this major point of failure in my viewing, watching. What am I happening? What is doing? No.
That's the effect Suspiria has on you.
It drives you insane. We bore witness, and now we're insane. Yeah, I was kind of disappointed because the original one is more of a slasher. You know, it's more throats getting slit and people coming for you in the night than we're going to throw your broken corpse into this death pit where the other monsters are. And it never scared me in that way where the original or the new one did.
Very little substance.
So little substance. Which is why it's great that it's an hour and a half, because it's the plot is so thin that they can summarize it in one scene where Susie, thank you, good, okay, where Susie goes to some doctors and says, hey, are witches real? And he goes, yes, they are. And she goes, I guess I know what this movie is about, let me go and figure it out. And she does. And the new one is different and draws all of that out, even if you're aware of what's happening sooner. But interestingly enough, I think the new one is as stylistic, if not overtly so. And you touched on this earlier, and I'll be curious because I only know this Suspiria and Call Me by Your Name. I don't know much of this director's other work, and I'd love to watch another movie that is infused with the same energy that this new one is, if I can handle it, which is up for debate at this point.
It's just, this version of Suspiria is so gray and bleak. It like so. The original is very vivid, but I feel like the new one's also vivid, or it's very, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's very flat, but the flatness of it is as stylized,
Yeah, and because then there are other moments that stand out in contrast, and because it's set in a more neutral world, some of the violence that happens, I think, hits a little bit harder. Because it's one thing to see, okay, this person got their throat cut and is squirting ketchup in this room that's lit like somebody covered the lights with limes, versus a very real room full of mirrors where this woman is getting bashed around. And it's a less believable act, but in a more believable world, which grounds the violence in a stronger way, I think. And in a much more upsetting way. And some of that goes back to the dance choreography too. You know, I never thought I'd come on this show and say, hey guys, I'm scared of dance now, but I'm scared of dance now.
God, it's amazing. I can't talk about it enough. Because in the original, the dancing only played a small role. There's this great scene where Susie, she's feeling very, very unwell, but the teacher is still telling her she has to dance. So she's being like she's dragging herself, doing ballet warm-ups along the floor. It's very slow. Like, they don't cut. They just follow her, really struggling to do this simple ballet move. While in this one, the cuts are so sharp and fast to mimic the movement of their bodies, and it's such. And the dance sequences go on for so long, and it's exhausting to watch because it's so fast.
Yeah, but it's not so fast that you don't see what's happening, which is the other interesting thing. Usually a value I hold up in horror is not seeing things, and this movie breaks that because it will cut away very fast, but you'll still know exactly what's happening. So towards the end, when they're at this big recital and doing this big performance, and it's cutting down to Sarah, who's in this monster room, you see everything down there. Like, you know what these things are, you know who they are, you know what happened to them, but then it goes back and you're dancing again, you know? And it walks that weird balance of, like, speed but precision too, which a worse movie wouldn't be able to capture. And God knows this is not a worse movie. This is an excellent movie that I wish we could talk more about, but we are out of time because these shows have to be exactly 30 seconds, or 30 minutes. Oh, my hell. This is your chance to plug yourself or say, like, one last thing about Suspiria. Either way.
I like Suspiria. Some people don't, but I do. Follow me on Twitter at KAYMACKB. Look at the Ithacans reviews and features, especially our most recent one on Beauty Gurus. Find that online.
Yeah. And I'm Jake. I'm the host of the show. I do this every week until they kick me off. You can find me at Twitter at JD_Leary. I might start using it now. I think I started. I think I tried. That's exciting. You can listen to this show on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere else you get podcasts, or you can watch it on YouTube on the Ithacan, which I'd highly recommend because we do fun things with colors. That's all. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for watching. It's been a good time.